we did not have anybody that canceled. In fact, most people were like, finally, you guys should be charging more. Like, these were the emails we're getting back. Like, no, we'll pay whatever. I mean, if you'd have told us it was twice that, we would have paid it. And I'm not even saying this like to brag, but it was just like, how freaking cool is this? We have people who love the product and love our story, and they bought into this to where they're telling us it's not even like a question whether or not they're going to continue on this.
This is BizNinja Entrepreneur Radio with your host, Tyler Jorgensen.
Welcome out to BizNinja Entrepreneur Radio. I'm your host, Tyler Jorgensen, and today you get to have the pleasure of getting to know an old friend of mine, Derek Wilson. Derek has done a lot of things in his life, including crushing high-ticket sales and slinging beef. And we're going to talk about what he's working on now, especially gritstick.com. So I'm excited to hear the whole journey and to chat through it all. Welcome out to the show, Derek.
Hey man, I'm so stoked to be on here with you, Tyler. I've been seeing what you're doing with this forever, and just a pleasure to be on.
Yeah, it's been a minute, and we've been through a lot. And I always like to ask the question: when was the moment in your life that you first realized you were an entrepreneur?
Oh, really young, and I think it's mainly because I just don't like people telling me what to do. So. I don't know, like 4 years old, 5 years old.
Yeah.
That's probably the first time.
You're like, I didn't know what an entrepreneur was, but I knew I wasn't working for anyone else.
Yeah. I don't do well with authority kind of in general, I think. And so the best way to avoid that is to be an entrepreneur.
Now, there's a fine or a heavy Venn diagram overlap of entrepreneurship and sales.
Yeah.
And you had cut your chops quite a bit in the high ticket sales. Tell us a little bit about your experience in high ticket sales.
Yeah, well, that was always kind of like the best job you could have, because although in my ClickFunnels days it was a job, you still, the old adage, you eat what you kill, and you really kind of like, no one's going to tell you to be at the office more if your sales are crushing it. So in that sense, it's really hard to have a boss if you're doing well in sales. And I never, like, speaking of entrepreneurship, I never thought I would be in sales. I didn't like sales people, to be like honest. Like, I hated going to car dealerships back in the day. All of that, the slimy salesman, all of those types of just stereotypes. I never wanted it, but had the opportunity to work with Russell and ClickFunnels and do the high ticket. I actually worked with Russell pre-ClickFunnels, which was back in the .com secrets days for all of you OGs out there. So that was kind of where, like, my brother got a job there, and I had my own business. I was actually installing rain gutters on houses. And then the housing crisis of '08 hit and pretty much like just wiped me out. And he was like, hey, come do sales. And I'm like, dude, I can't do sales. I don't even like to sell. And he's like, yeah, but look, there's a great opportunity to make a bunch of money. And I was like, well, I do like that. So yeah, I got into the .com secrets. We had the big call center. For those people who have ever followed Russell, he's talked about it. We had a bunch of guys there, was a team leader, worked my way up from literally no sales experience to a team leader there. And then that all kind of folded, went and did some other things, came back when Russell launched ClickFunnels. And then, just kind of went full high ticket sales before it was really something that everybody talked about. And just kind of went through that whole journey.
Okay, we're going to zoom even further back. So you were doing rain gutters. Was that your first entrepreneur, like, real business?
Yeah. So I was going to college to, I don't know what was probably the problem. I wanted to play football, ended up tearing labrum in my shoulder, never even stepped on the field. And I wasn't going to college to, like, get educated, which is something you probably should do. I was basically going to play football when football wasn't there. I still had actually an academic scholarship, but I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And so I kind of floated around, partied too much, didn't show up to class, all the stuff that you should probably do. And I had an opportunity. I had an uncle of mine who had this business and he wanted to sell it. And it was $20,000 to buy this business. He already had some clientele and a bit of a name. And I was like, that would be great, because kind of like I was doing some construction on the side and all of that. And I always just loved the idea of, like, my dad was an entrepreneur, just in the sense he was a cattle rancher. So he didn't have the, traditional sense of a business owner, but he was his own boss. And I always liked that. And I was like, if I buy this business, then I can be my own boss. I can make as much money as I want. That's awesome. Like, I've been swinging a hammer for $10 an hour, sweating my butt off on roofs and stuff. It's like, I can go make like $1,000 in a day with this business. And so long story short, try to get a loan. No one's going to loan a 21-year-old kid any money to buy a business, right? And ended up, my grandma loaned me the money and I paid her back every penny of it with interest. But that was how I got into the business of being an entrepreneur. 21 years. It was so funny because we'd show up to these jobs, to bid these jobs. And I had a buddy of mine helping me who was like the same age. We were 21, I think, at that point, 20 or 21. And it was always like, oh yeah, so you'll do the bid, but like who's your boss? And it's like, really? I'm the boss. Come on. And it's like, no, I know like you're the boss, but like who owns the company? And it's like, actually I do. And so it was always like really funny showing up to jobs because you would get that all the time, just a couple of young, dumb kids. But hey, man, we worked hard, wanted to make some money. And that was kind of the first experience with it.
So, you do that, the housing market falls apart. That beat up a lot of us, right?
Yeah.
You got into sales from those early days. What were some of the lessons that you learned that have helped you as you've continued moving on?
Yeah, I think from the early days in business, you start understanding that everything is dependent on you, which is like that double-edged sword, right? It's very, very terrifying, but it's also very reassuring because ultimately, and even with the housing crisis, I look back and it's, I wasn't doing any marketing. I had no understanding of marketing whatsoever. I didn't want to even like spend money to get in the yellow pages if you're old enough to remember what those were.
Right.
It was just all word of mouth and I would go knock some doors and stuff, but I didn't do any marketing. And so like the first lesson I would say is it was really awesome to know that your fate is in your hands. The second thing was you have to market. Like people have to know that you exist if you want to be in business. And so those were like two of the big things that I learned early on. Just, yeah, I mean, it was just so cool to be up to me how much I could or couldn't make. Like I just found that so cool.
And it's really fascinating that that's what you came back to, that because so many people, so many businesses that collapsed in 2008 or even in 2020 to 2022 through like the COVID crash, it wasn't really the market, the housing market or the other thing that forced it to crash. It was really that their business wasn't properly set up, right? Like you
100%.
I didn't have proper marketing. I didn't have a robust marketing plan. I had a single lever, and when that lever broke, the business broke. But there were other businesses that didn't break during that.
Yeah.
And so I think for me, like learning to pay attention to that and like never having a single point of failure in the business, right, or in my marketing or in lead flow, that's huge. What are you working on these days? Catch us up with what's happening now.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like kind of the Forrest Gump path to get to where I've been. Like so much of my life, it's so weird because, you'll hear people, are you lucky? Or like, what do you attribute any of your success to? And we all, as entrepreneurs, are like hard work, but so many things have just been so weird to get to where we're at. Because when I was at ClickFunnels, and people probably know that business, especially when it first launched, it was an absolute unicorn. How fast it grew, just the momentum and the excitement, the money. And I was making more money than I'd ever made in my life, like more money in a year than a lot of years, maybe a couple or several years, right? And all of that was like really, really awesome. And then one day I get a phone call. I'm literally on the phone pitching a deal. And this guy is just what we in the sales world call a laydown. He's ready to go. And I think it was like a $12K deal that I was selling him. And I kept getting this phone call from my dad, and I would ignore it. Like I'll call him back. It was right before Christmas and just didn't really think anything of it. Well, then all of a sudden, I get a call from my sister, and I get a call, my brother's like, and it's like, oh my gosh, what is going on? And then I found out that just that quick, my dad had actually passed away from a heart attack. Oh. And so it was like the weirdest thing because at that moment in my life, I was doing better than I'd ever done. Money, we had just bought in like this 3,400 square foot house. We had the cars that we wanted, had all of this stuff. And from like a material standpoint and from a life standpoint, I was like, this is as good as it gets. But then all of a sudden I get this call and it changed everything. And so I tell you that because like with what I'm doing now, I never would have told you like 10 years ago or even 7 years ago that we would be where we're at. But long story short, we ended up selling our dream home, moving back to our ranch, going through a crazy property battle, buying my stepmom out. And when we got back here, we decided to launch a business. And funny enough, I'll just tell you this real quick. So I decided after I quit ClickFunnels, I walked away from that because I wanted to kind of go all in with this place, with our ranch. And I didn't really know exactly what it was. And I was still like consulting and even still to this day do some consulting. But I went actually back to Funnel Hacking Live again after I had left. And it was out in Nashville, and went out there for the first time in my life. I didn't have to wear a silly shirt. I didn't have to, greet people as they walked in or sell anybody any inner circles or any of that stuff. I just got to go and hang out. And it was actually 2020. It was the COVID year. Like by the end of it, like almost everybody was gone because everyone was sick before it really hit. But Tom Bilyeu was there. And he said something to me that, man, I would love to share with your listeners because it's so stupid simple, but it's literally like the best thing I've ever heard in my life when it comes to business advice. And he was on stage. And for those of you who don't know, he was like the owner of Quest. And he's like, if you want to build $1 billion business, it's really simple. Just find something that as soon as people consume it, they need more of it. And I was like, okay, that's like the dumbest genius advice I've ever heard. And so I came back from Funnel Hacking Live, and I was sitting there and I'm like talking to my wife, and it's like, we raise cattle, and we do, or had always done what's called the cow-calf operation. You just sell the calves and then they take them and whatever. And I was like, we have meat that people eat and then they need more of it. And then they buy that and they eat it and they need more of it. And like, we could do subscriptions. I was like, why don't we just launch a meat business? And she's like, okay. And so that was where we launched Crosso Meats, was coming back from an internet marketing conference, listening to Tom Bilyeu, coming back to our little tiny town. We live outside of 400 people. And we're like, let's start a business selling beef. And literally within like a month, we had launched the business, and we still had to, raise our cattle and everything and do some things differently. But yeah, came back and launched it and have been kind of on the entrepreneur journey with that ever since.
All right. So you go to Funnel Hacking Live, a bunch of internet marketers, and you come back and you realize we already have this business. We already have all the things that we need. We just got to build a website and sell to the end user or in process. I was always wondering, because I remember when you launched, I remember when you did this, did you have to like figure out the butchery? Like what did you have to do to be able to make that, other than build a website? What did you have to do to actually make it happen?
It's a nightmare. And I mean, it really is, because the concept, it's just like any business, right? Like the concept, you're like, this will be great. We'll just sell meat to people. And then you start looking and you have USDA regulations. And I don't know how many people are aware of this, but during COVID, something that really weird happened was everyone started bringing animals to like butcher them, right? Not to be like too graphic or whatever, but so you couldn't get USDA butcher dates at all. Like I literally used my best sales pitch ever on a place that's like 3 hours away from us to even be able to get dates to process our beef. And because they're telling everybody we're 2 years out right now. It's like, what do you mean you're 2 years out? And it's like, we have some that need to go here in like 6 months. And they're like, yeah, we can't do it. And so luckily I was able to sweet talk and do everything I could to sell this lady on allowing us to do it. And we just started with a pretty small amount because we didn't know. And unlike like the internet marketing world, you have a physical product that doesn't stay great forever, right? Like obviously you can freeze it, but we're not talking selling ebooks to where if one person buys it, yeah. And so it was like, we didn't want to extend ourselves so much to where if this didn't work, we would be out of business. So we pre-sold, which I think is always a good idea. But yeah, like the USDA, because we ship nationwide. And so anytime anything like that goes across state lines, it has to be USDA certified and inspected. And then we had to learn how to like keep the meat cold when you freeze it, and dry ice and boxes and liners, and how you package it and what labels you and warnings. Like if you ship dry ice, like there was so much to it to where, because I used to always wonder, why don't more like kind of farmers and ranchers do this? Found out really soon, like really fast, why more people don't do it, because it's an absolute nightmare. But again, we just kind of put our head down. It's like, we're going to figure this thing out. And we did.
That's awesome. And then you've kind of listened to the market and made some changes, right? So talk to me about what you've changed and what you've added through listening to your customers.
So this is, I think, one of the best lessons of don't project you onto your customers, because I think we all want to do that. Like, oh, what I'm willing to pay for this is X. Why would anybody else pay more? Or like so many of those things. One of the biggest things is, again, like I lived in the Boise area for like 15 years, but I grew up very rural and we moved back to a very rural area. And so when you live rural, you're kind of used to having like a big chest freezer with a bunch of like meat in it, right? Whether it's wild game or beef or pork or whatever. People in the country and rural areas tend to be kind of like preppers, I guess, right? Like they stock up on stuff. So when we first got in this game, we're like, we're going to sell halves. Like everybody, everybody wants a half a beef or a quarter beef or whatever. And so we threw it out there and we started hearing from people like, hey, I really want to buy from you, but I don't have any place to store a quarter of a beef. And we're like, it's not that much. Really, like a quarter of beef is not that much. But people, they live in apartment buildings. They live, in homes that don't have backyards and don't have big chest freezers. They literally have like the freezer in their fridge, in their refrigerator. And so we were
I'm just laughing at you even saying that, because I can hear how you're like, crazy people only have one freezer. And I'm like, yeah, I only have one freezer.
And that's most people. But again, when you're rural, everyone has like two or three of like the big cubic, whatever deep freezers.
And we assume everyone is like us, right? That's the uninformed marketer. So you started realizing people buy differently than you buy.
Yes, 100%. And we were just like, okay, some people are buying it, but most people are reaching out being like, that's just too much. Can I just buy a steak from you? And we're like, no, you can't buy that. That would be crazy, because then what are we going to do with the rest of this thing? Right. And so finally, like hearing this enough, it's like, we have to do something different. So what we decided to do is kind of coming back to Tom Bilyeu's advice is let's launch a subscription, because this kind of solves two problems for us. Number one, it solves the problem of one of the big problems, and not to get too far into the weeds with this, is that when you butcher, a beef, you get like maybe, let's say 28 ribeyes, but you also get potentially like 300 to 400 pounds of ground beef. So I can sell those steaks. Like anytime we put steaks on our website, they're pretty much sold out immediately. But you also then have like 400 pounds of ground beef. And what the heck are we going to do with all of this ground beef? And that's where we started being like, oh, and luckily, people buy some of it, but we were just sitting there thinking like, how do we solve this problem? So we decided, okay, what if we do a subscription, and in every subscription, you're going to have a certain amount of ground beef. Like that's what allows you to get a little bit better of a deal by subscribing, is you're going to have ground beef with your subscription. And we're going to put in some steaks and some roasts and some of this other stuff, but like there's going to be ground beef in there. And so that was a huge game changer. Now, fast forward to like one of the scariest moments of my life, speaking of changes in business, is we decided, okay, we have to up the price of what we're doing with this, because we had no margins. There's not a lot of margins in beef at all, but it's like, we've got to increase the price and we need to systemize this now, because when we're down there and you're trying to do all these subscriptions and there's kind of little variations between the different options, we were starting to grow to the point to where we couldn't do that easily. It would take like a full day for us just to pack all, and it was a pain in the butt. And it was like, okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to make our subscription super simple. You're going to get 2 New Yorks, 2 ribeyes, 2 sirloins, 2 fillets, and 5 pounds of ground beef. And here's the price. You don't have any option to substitute anything. Like this is what it is. And so all of our like existing subscriber base, which literally is the backbone of our business, it's that residual income every single month that you can depend on.
Yep.
We're sending this email to them. And if a bunch of them say, we don't like this, we're not cool with the, more of the standard box and the price increase, we could be out of business tomorrow. But if we don't do this, we could be out of business in like a month or two, because it's just not sustainable. It's not scalable.
Yeah.
And coming back to what I learned from Russell was do everything you can to make people feel like they're part of the journey with you and they own the story with you. we did not have anybody that canceled. In fact, most people were like, finally, you guys should be charging more. Like, these were the emails we're getting back. Like, no, we'll pay whatever. I mean, if you'd have told us it was twice that, we would have paid it. And I'm not even saying this like to brag, but it was just like, how freaking cool is this? We have people who love the product and love our story, and they bought into this to where they're telling us it's not even like a question whether or not they're going to continue on this. And so those were like two of the huge ones. And then the third change that we had to make was still the ground beef problem. We were able to get rid of a lot of it through the subscriptions. But again, you're getting, every time you have a beef process, you're just getting hundreds and hundreds of pounds of it. And we thought, do we go the commercial route? Well, no one wants to pay what we need to make on the ground beef for that. So that was when we launched our grit sticks, which are our beef sticks, super clean, all of that. And so now we're able to take a lot of that burger, put it into a shelf stable beef stick. And now we're finally to the point to where all of these moving parts are like selling at the rates that they need to, which has allowed us to essentially like double our business every year we've done it.
That's awesome. And so I love that the grit sticks came out of a need for you to solve the problem of like, what do we do with this extra? Because it's also something, like you said, more shelf stable. So it solves multiple problems. And with so many people, that want to eat quality, want to, get their protein intake in, I've noticed in the market a massive increase in people wanting those types of products. So that's really cool. I just think it's neat how that's all come together. What have been, you've shared some already, some of the setbacks or the challenges, but getting into grit sticks, that's a whole other product line too, right? And so are you pushing retail? Are you pushing just online subscriptions? What's your, that's a whole new direction. What's your take on that? What's your angle?
So here's what most people don't know about beef sticks, which you would think it would be super easy to send it to a company, right? Like some type of meat shop or whatever, and say, hey, create me a beef stick. And they'll be like, cool, here it is. It is, again, just mind-numbingly painful to do something like that. So the first thing you have to do is, again, if you're ever going to do any type of retail, you have to do it USDA certified. So we had to obviously do that. You have to get all of your labeling correct, your ingredients, all the recipes dialed in. So we finally found, after literally like 2 years of looking, because what we wanted to make sure of is that we were using beef that we raise, because one of our big claims is 100% American raised beef, right? It's actually raised in Idaho, but we want to make sure that people understand they're getting American beef. What is fascinating is that when you go to like some of these big places that put out all this jerky and beef sticks, they're getting in all of this meat, typically like foreign beef, and it all goes to the same place. And then all these big companies that you've probably heard of, if you eat beef sticks or any meat snacks or anything else, it basically all comes out of the same 4 facilities in the Midwest. And they just, same meat, different recipe, different label, ship it out. Same meat, this recipe over here, different label over here, different company, it goes out. And so I'm trying to negotiate with these people of like, hey, but we want to use our own beef. And they're like, no, like we'll just source it for you. And it's like, but you're missing the whole concept behind this. We want to use our beef. We want to use American beef. And they're like, no, because then we have to clean all the machines out and it's just going to be cost prohibitive. And so we dealt with that for like 2 years. Finally found this place in Montana that does USDA, that will do our beef. And so then you start the recipe process. We didn't want MSG. We didn't want any added nitrates. We wanted it to be like a clean option. Once again, you're told that's really stupid because you're going to get way less yield. Use MSG. You're going to get, instead of, maybe 68 to 72% yield, you'll get like 78, 80% yield. And over time, that's a ton of money. And we're, again, just dumb enough and stubborn enough to be like, no, but we don't want to do that. We want it to be like a healthy snack. And so we had to go back and forth on the recipes and use celery salt versus the MSG stuff and like all of these different things to preserve it, to make it shelf stable. And then you get to the trademarking, right? And the amount of money that it costs to have something trademarked and the lawyers and back and forth. And it just, like, without dragging it out, literally it was like a 2-year process before we had a finished product. And when we got it, the labels looked terrible. Like, just, I mean, I don't think we've ever done anything correct the first time, I guess is what I'm getting at. But we are dumb enough. And Yeah. Is that normal? I don't know.
That's
It
normal. Yeah.
seems like some people just like they touch stuff and it turns to gold. And I feel like it turns to, I won't say it on here, but we all know probably what I'm thinking. But just with enough refining, man, I mean, somehow or another, we seem to get some progress.
In my experience, it is more normal than it is, but we also tend to see other people's stories and only see like the highlights, right? And so, and a lot of people aren't willing to share the learning and the lessons and things. But I mean, when I started this radio show 15 years ago, it was because I was launching an e-commerce product. I was going through a lot of the learning things that you're learning. I was figuring out labeling and products and federal regulations, and I didn't have anyone to turn to. So I actually started the show as a way for me to talk to people, because people would.
Man, you should. Why didn't you tell me that? Why didn't you tell me to go back and listen to those episodes?
Yeah, I mean, they're old. It's been a long time, but I mean, but that's the thing, is that we all, we see other people's success stories, but we rarely hear the harder parts and the lessons, and they often get glossed over. But those mistakes, man. I mean, for years in this show, I've been asking people like, "But what mistakes did you make early on, and what did you learn from them?" And these types of things that you're sharing, it's what everyone has to go through, because most people don't have that mentor that's like, "Hey, follow my exact blueprint for starting a meat stick company." Right.
Well, you were part of like the ClickFunnels world too, and I think one of the things that was so challenging for me the first couple of years wasn't just the challenges, but when you came from that kind of ClickFunnels world, everybody was bragging $0 to $1 million in a month, right? $0 to $10 million in a year. Like, you would just hear these success stories of kind of the rags to riches over and over and over again. And you start thinking, okay, maybe this just isn't a viable business, because it's not making the amount of money in the first 6 months or the first year. And I'll never forget, I was never a fan of Andy Frisella, right? He's very, brash and everything else. But then I kept hearing about him. And finally I was like, I'm going to listen to some of his podcasts. And I literally fell in love with his message, because he was the first person who was very successful that kept saying it's going to be harder than you think, and it's going to take longer than you think. And I was like, finally, somebody who gets me, man. I've been hearing all these internet marketing gurus tell me how fast they've made $1 million. And I'm here just grinding my butt off, doing everything so completely wrong. And I just feel like I am doing something that's not right, because it just hasn't been as easy as all these guys say. And so thank God Andy Frisella is at least telling me it's going to be way harder and take way longer. At least now it's like, okay, maybe there is some light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. And a lot of those businesses that you're referencing didn't sustain. Those were offers that launched, not businesses.
Right.
And so the challenge with people who got it, so I didn't really start in internet marketing in the internet marketing world. And so I kind of learned it all, and then ended up finding the other world. So I was able to add on to what I was doing. But to me, it's like you have to build a good business first, and then you use marketing principles to grow the business. But sadly, a lot of people skip build a good business at all. But all right, we're coming to the end here, and I've really enjoyed this. A couple of things. One, where do people go if they want to support your business?
Yeah, I mean, if you guys want to hear kind of the story behind the scenes of it all, I have a podcast called The Derek Wilson Show. So we kind of actually just relaunched it. I did a different one called the Primal King Podcast for 5 years, but this is the new version. So for anybody who just kind of likes the ranch, the rural, behind the scenes, strong opinions, that sort of thing, you guys can kind of follow along the journey as we continue building there. And then, I mean, everybody needs a little more grit in their life. So go buy some grit sticks and go do some really cool stuff after you do that. So that's kind of been how we've tried to brand this business, is that, I feel like there's a lot of people out there that do really cool stuff that requires a ton of grit. And it's kind of been forgotten in our society, right? The people out there that are grinding to do their business, and maybe they don't have the internet marketing luxury lifestyle. Maybe they are literally the people out there that are running a small business or doing the blue collar work, and they just need a little extra grit. Hey man, that's what a grit stick is for.
Love that. So that's gritstick.com. And then now, Derek, all of this business, all of this stuff doesn't really matter if we're not living a life that we love. What's one item on your personal bucket list that you're going to accomplish in the next 12 months?
Oh boy, in the next 12 months. Outside of business?
Yep.
Oh man. I feel like I kind of live two lives. And one is I spend like 90% of my free time in a gym. We have 4 kids, club volleyball, basketball, football, all the stuff. And I mean, honestly, like one of my bucket lists is just, I don't know. I just want to see my kids do really well, like with sports, with what they're doing. And so that's kind of like the short term, if we're talking like just overall in life. Like my daughter, sophomore this year, they took 3rd in state in basketball, 3rd in state in volleyball on her team. And honestly, man, business is cool. Money's awesome. But like seeing your kids out there crushing it, there's nothing better than that. And I try on any of my platforms that I have to always talk about perspective, because I know a lot of people who spent a lot of years just building their business and missing out on that stuff. And they all tell me the exact same thing, which is like, I would give anything to go back to when my kids were that age and do anything that I could to go back and experience it. So as much as I love business and I have goals there, if there's a basketball game going on, I'm in the gym. If there's a volleyball game on, I'm in the gym. If there's a football game on, I'm on the field. So that's really like, I just always want to keep that.
I love that. And trust me when I say it ends very fast.
Yes.
And so enjoy every one of those moments. Derek, thank you so much for coming out and sharing your story. And hope everyone goes and gets some meat at gritstick.com. And to all my biz ninjas, wherever you're listening, tuning, watching, it's your turn to go out and do something.